This conference is organized to highlight the importance of the discussion of human rights violations around the world, and that Canada should not stand aside, but rather be an active player on the global stage advocating for human rights and peace. It is very important that Canadians of different backgrounds share their knowledge and expertise in the field of human rights abuse in their home countries, and that we better understand each other and thus unite around the cause of human rights. What is different about this event from many others is that we bring people of various communities. Thus we make our communities, we bring them together, and that makes our communities only stronger. And hence it's a great symbolism that we have speakers of Chinese, Pakistani, Persian, and representative of Canadian politics here all together under one roof on the event sponsored by the Estonian Central Council in one of the most diverse cities on the planet, Toronto. Writer, poet, journalist, publisher, translator, with over 30 years of experience in the industry. He's a regular contributor and columnist at Huffington Post and many other newspapers. His novels and collections of short stories and poem books have been translated to many languages and published in many countries. Before immigrating to Canada, he was a publisher in Pakistan of a socio-political magazine, Hafta. He's also an anchor and a TV person on TAC TV, whom we have here today with us. His shows get more than 100 million views online and through different social media. He is also a recognized activist who initiated many interfaith and pluralistic streams to bring the Muslim community of Canada together to support progressive and to support progressive ideas and actions.
We are supporting inequality in the name of equality day and night. Since we are not ready to call spade a spade, how could we respond to those human rights issues abroad? This question itself carries so many concerns. Previous conservative government tried her best to ban burqa in public sphere. This burqa is clearly a symbol of gender segregation and inequality, but our so-called liberal forces endorse this sign of equality in the name of equality. Burqa is not prescribed in Islam and even not allowed during Muslims' Hajj pilgrimage, but our liberal media, political parties support such non-liberal barriers for the sake of personal choice. I understand any dress should be allowed in our democratic society, but burqa is something over the dress. It's a mask sort of facilitating to conceal ID as well. The rising culture of political correctness is not just ruining our core values, but also our model of free speech. As a journalist, I could not live in Pakistan due to my criticism on state-sponsored Islamic extremism and terrorism. I could never agree with Pakistan's notorious brutal intelligence agency ISI's atrocities on Baloch, Muhajirs, Pashtuns, Sindhi nationalists, and as well as atrocities on minorities such as Christians, Shias, and Ahmadis. Dissidents like myself were targets of Taliban and Pakistan's notorious agencies. So I left Pakistan and managed to flee Canada in April 1999. Here I started publishing and editing a weekly Urdu language newspaper in November 1999. I sensed hatred against Ahmadis, Shias, and Pakistani Christians in Pakistani community at the time. I raised my criticism against such behavior in Canada, and guess what I got in return? Death threats, harassments, bullying, social and economic boycott right here in Toronto. Mosque establishments and ISI elements patronized by Pakistani diplomats in Canada forced my advertisers to pull advertisements from my little weekly newspaper by 2003 and made me to shut my newspaper. Those elements didn't stop at all. Now they are more powerful and influential. They have access to federal and Ontario governments. Last summer, 3 Liberal member parliamentarians of Pakistani and Syrian origin encircled me and my wife in a Mississauga festival. They threatened and harassed us to the extent that I had to write an open letter to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on June 8, 2016. I sent an email to Prime Minister, as well copied it to over a dozen member parliamentarians, including opposition leader and the Speaker of the House. I seek assurance of free press environment from the Prime Minister, but I haven't received any assurance yet. Let me share a short story of that incident. On a bright sunny Saturday afternoon, June 4th, 2016, I saw MP Umar Al-Ghabra walking to an event stage with 2 other MPs, Salma Zahid and Iqra Khalid. I was standing with my wife, Halima Sadia, and a few friends at the Halal Food Festival Celebration Square, Mississauga. As we know all 3 MPs, my wife and I greeted them. My wife, an anchor person, asked MP Umar Al-Ghabra to come to our TAG TV studio. Al-Ghabra blasted us in return and pointed out to me that I wrote a misleading article against him and the infiltration of Islamists to the Liberal Party. I answered that I didn't write any misleading article. Then he opened his smartphone and showed me my article with the title, quote, "Brotherhood Front Groups Target Canadian Parliament," unquote. That was published in April 3rd, 2014. He accused me of attacking the Muslim Brotherhood, Jamaat-e-Islami, and other Muslim groups in that article and called me a discredited journalist. He then lectured me about the ethics of journalism for around 15 minutes. MP Salma Zahid jumped into the discussion and accused me of mentioning her name against previous government's Bill C-51 that then MP Iqra Khalid accused me of associating her with Jamaat-e-Islami. I pondered that if any single article about my opinion on growing Islamic extremism in Greater Toronto area is upsetting those Canadian Muslim MPs to that extent that they were so intolerant and humiliating to me and my wife and towards dissident thoughts, how could we expect them to create a bridge between the government and Canada's diverse Muslim communities? In this scenario, how could I trust this Labour government to respond human rights abuses abroad? Baloch, Muhajir, and Pashtun in Balochistan, Pakistan, and Afghanistan are suffering in the hands of Pakistan Army and its notorious intelligence agency, ISI. Their brutal activities are well known to our former Citizenship and Immigration Minister, Honorable Chris Alexander. I clearly remember Pakistan's 3 former consul generals in Toronto launched a smear campaign against Mr. Alexander on his stance against Pakistan Army. That campaign eventually affected Mr. Alexander's election as well. Anyhow, thousands Baloch and Muhajir are being killed and kidnapped by the Pakistan state machinery, but our Canadian parliamentarians of Pakistani origin are allegedly portraying Baloch and Muhajir as terrorists and traitors to Canadian government. Now I'm learning that Baloch and Muhajir are facing challenges in terms of acquiring refugee status in Canada, because those member parliamentarians of Pakistani origin are clearly under the influence of ISI and portraying them as terrorists and traitors and posing them as threat to Canada. We have few Canadian Baloch in this room. They can share their stories of sufferings when they get chance to speak. Ms. Karima Baloch is here, whose hundreds of friends and family members were tortured and killed in front of her eyes. I have been asked on and off by members of Canadian law and enforcement agencies about magnitude of terrorist threats by potential terrorists here in Canada. My answer has been, yes, I'm quite concerned But I'm not less concerned about social fabric of my own community, where most Muslim kids are being taught to not mingle with Canadians because they deem them as infidel and sinful people. This is a story of Toronto, Ajax, Markham, Oakville, Mississauga, Calgary, Edmonton, and many other cities in Canada. Recently, Muslim Student Association, an offshoot of Muslim Brotherhood, demanded to pray and preach rights in Mississauga schools. I would not be surprised if they be given formally those rights. They are doing anyway whatever is in their capacity. As a Muslim-born person and a practicing journalist for over 30 years within a number of Muslim communities, I clearly see underlying hatred within the Muslim diaspora against each other's sects, as well as towards non-Muslims. Liberal Muslim Alliance has pushed real secular, liberal and progressive Muslims against the wall, being beneficial to each other in terms of Muslim vote banks for liberals and Muslims' privileges from liberals is not a deal at all. Together, we are ruining the liberal pillars of democracy. Sadly, political Islamists in our major mosques and other Islamic establishments are maneuvering ordinary Muslim sentiments against Western societies until those mosques and organizations in Canada and elsewhere denounce violent jihad, Sharia law, gender inequality, intolerance, the mixing of religion and politics, and political Islam itself. Muslims won't be integrated in modern societies. In this scenario, when our government clearly seems oblivious from human rights abuses here in Canada, it is hard to trust our government responding effectively abroad. Thank you.
I would like also to introduce to you Sheng Shu. She's a poet, writer, journalist, magazine columnist, political commentator, radio and TV show on radio and TV. She's a huge advocate, this is how I know her, for democracy and human rights in China, and she's a key leader of the overseas Chinese democratic movement. She's also the president of the Federation for Democratic China. She is a recipient of numerous rewards. Among them, in 2012, she received the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal. And this year, in July of 2016, she was chosen as one of the Canada Stories for the special edition of 150th special edition of Maclean's magazine.
2004, and he was kidnapped there and sentenced to life in China and died November the 29th in prison. I feel very painful because he came to me before he went to Burma. He asked me to go to Burma to do something for him. And I didn't trust the plan. I didn't go. So today, on the way to here, to this conference, I said to my husband, I feel some way you know that he died for me, because if somehow I went, the person who is in Chinese prison should be me, not him. And also, we have a lady here, Hua Hua, please stand up. Yeah, Gu Shu Hua. Her husband was kidnapped in Thailand last November and took back to China and still waiting for the trial. And her husband is a human rights activist, escaped to Thailand last September and was arrested in Thailand by Thai government. And the Chinese government took him and another gentleman whose name is Jiang Yefei from the Thai prison back to China, if you believe. And then they both put onto CCTV, the state-owned television, to confirm themselves as guilty. And this kind of cases is getting more and more. If people pay attention to the human rights abuse in China, you may learn about a publisher who is Swedish and was kidnapped in Thailand and took back to China. Nobody knows how, and still holding there until today. And when the Swedish government asked for where he is about, the Chinese Foreign Affairs replied, "If you continue to ask, we have our way to make him to withdraw his citizenship of Sweden." So the Swedish government shut it up. So this is our reality. It's not far from us. You may think, okay, it's in China, it's in in Thailand or Burma or Vietnam, wherever. No, they are also here. You do agree. When I was testified in Parliament to a human rights hearing, it was 10 years ago, I warned. I said, the Chinese dictatorship is not far. It's not like thousands of miles away, but here. And they are living with us. Their media, their investment, their papers and TVs and the radios and their even the Confucius Institute, everything. And of course, people with the idea. And they are damaging our community. My experience is a very good example too. Yeah, since they cannot arrest me as if I am in China or in some country, they do have the ability. They launched a very big online attacking, smear attacking. And there are hundreds, probably 500 or 600 pieces, articles about me. And not only about me, about my mother, about my grandfather, and about my husband, of course. And they have 3 books. And also, they PS'd my photos. And those photos even are on the website and running by Canadians here in Canada. I reported this to our police stations 4 times. But they said, I'm sorry, we are sorry. There's nothing more, nothing much we can do. And during the Tiananmen Square massacre's 25th anniversary, my home phone number, my cell phone number, our web phone number were published onto the advertising across North America. And I received tens of phone calls day and night. And the advertising, of course, you can imagine that saying that I'm offering sex service. And I reported to police station. And I was advised to change my phone number. And nothing else they can do. And when Trudeau, he said that he favors about the Chinese dictatorship 2 years ago, I was very, very shocked. And we had a media conference. Pretty much media paid attention, and we called him to come to our hearing conference. He didn't show up. I couldn't imagine that he was be able to elected as our prime minister. I'm sorry about that. And for someone who believes in communism, it's very dangerous for Canada. And let we watch on, keep our eye on him. Just a few days ago, when Castro died and he paid his tribute, and even on behalf of Canadian. And I saw Stacy said something on her Facebook, and I copied and I sent to my friends. And someone is arguing about this with me. But believe, I think fascism and communism, also terrorism, are the three major cancers in our human rights, in our human history. And they are combined together, and they are still very, very effective. Not only the Chinese communists, and also I paid attention to the problems in Russia. And when I was attending an event in City Hall, I met with Stacy. I was very happy and very encouraged because I see like young people like her, living in Canada, not only to open her heart to love Canada, but also she spends the time, the energy, and to care about what is happening in her hometown. And Canada is a country. We have probably more than 200 different ethnics. And this is the very strong part of us, but we need to use it. And for those evil forces, it's very easy for them to unite together because they know what do they want, and they want the same thing. But for democratic forces, it's very hard, very difficult for us to unite together because people, for a democratic system, always want something else, always want something different. But it's the time for us to unite together, to be a more strong solidarity, because we are facing a very, very strong enemy, not far away from us, but here. If we don't do this, we are losing our values. And we have to keep this in our mind. When I was elected as the vice president of the Writer for Peace Committee for PAN International, I said, of course, probably most people love peace, but we need to know. Fake peace controlled by dictatorship is even horrible than war. Because when there's a war, means that different forces, they have a chance to fight to each other. But for the reality, like in Tibet or for Uyghur people in China, they has been totally silenced. They don't even have a chance to make any noise. So you don't know what kind of life they are living. And let me say, Canada is a big country in human rights and need to take more responsibility. And for a lot of countries doing trade with China, and they gave up a lot of values, but Canada need to stand still. And if we don't care, the government won't care. How should they care? And especially during this government, if Mr. Trudeau, he believes in communism, I don't trust him. We need to put more pressure on him and want him to listen to our voice, and especially us. Thank you very much.
I would like to also introduce Dr. Zandi. Dr. Zandi is the professor of economics and associate director of undergraduate program at Schulich School of Business. He has degree, he has PhD in economics from Carleton University, Masters of Arts in Economics from Lakehead University. He also served as a consultant for various public and private enterprises, including Ontario Ministry of Health, Ontario Ministry of Trade and Economic Development, Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Immigration, Human Resources Canada, Economic Council of Canada. Wow, quite a list. And most importantly, he's one of the strongest advocates in the Persian community for a democratic and secular path for Iran.
To start with, last year the Islamic Republic hit its highest rate of executing people in the last decade. Approximately 1,000 people were executed in 2015, according to the latest report from Ahmad Shahid, the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Iran. The unofficial number is higher, twice as many as 2010, when the hardline President Ahmadinejad was in office, and roughly 10 times more than the number of execution in 2005. Islamic Republic of Iran has surpassed China in the number of executions being carried out per capita. Most of the executions in Iran are being done by hanging. Under the laws of Islamic Republic, many crimes are punishable by death, including some that do not involve violence, such as insulting the Prophet, apostasy, same-sex relations, adultery, drug-related offenses, and death sentences on charges of moraba, which means enmity against God. The judiciary in Islamic Republic of Iran falls under the authority of the supreme leader and plays a vital role in preserving Iran's Islamic system. Security authorities also regularly clamp down on free speech and dissent, and revolutionary courts hand down harsh sentences against social media users, including death sentences in some cases. According to Reporters Without Borders, as of December 2015, Islamic Republic of Iran held at least 50 journalists, bloggers, and social media activists in detention. The authorities continue to severely restrict freedom of expression, association, and assembly. They block Facebook, Twitter, and other social media websites, close or suspend media outlets, including magazines for women, particularly jam foreign satellite television stations, arrest and imprison journalists and online and other critics, and suppress peaceful protests. Judicial officials have also continued their efforts to further erode the independence of the Iranian Bar Association and restricted the right of criminal defendants to access a lawyer of their own choosing during the investigation phase of national security cases. The regime's most repressive policies, however, have been aimed at Iranian women who face discrimination in many aspects of their lives, including personal status matters related to marriage, divorce, inheritance, and child custody. Authorities prevent girls and women from attending certain sporting events, including men's soccer and volleyball matches. Iranian women are worth one half of life of men. In 2015, authorities sought to introduce or implement discriminatory laws, including restricting the employment of women in certain sectors and limiting access to family planning as part of official measures to boost Iran's population. On April 22nd, the Guardian Council, which is an unelected body of 12 religious jurists, approved a controversial bill that empowers voluntary Basij paramilitary forces to promote virtue and prevent vice. It's interesting to know that about 60% of university students in Iran are women, and about 65% of medical students are also women, despite everything that is happening inside Iran. The government also denies freedom of religion to Baha'is faith, Iran's largest non-Muslim religion minority, and discriminated against them. Security and intelligence forces also target Christian converts from Islam and Persian-speaking Protestant and evangelical congregations. And the authorities continue to destroy sacred sites of Baha'is, Sunnis, Sufis, including their cemeteries and places of worship. Special courts, which are effectively established outside the law, as well as the revolutionary courts, continue to function without observing international fair trial standards. Notwithstanding, the international community has failed to respond adequately to the waves of state-sponsored violence and ongoing repression that has gripped the country throughout the last 37 years. By June 2010, there was still no international action on the human rights situation in Iran, despite the consensus that the Islamic Republic represented the world's worst human rights crisis over the preceding 12 months. Finally, on March 2011, the United Nations Human Rights Council voted to single out Islamic Republic of Iran as a nation deserving of a special rapporteur on human rights to monitor the suspected abuses. The United Nations mechanism was designed to exert international pressure on the IRI, Islamic Republic government, to improve its human records. 5 years later, after appointment, Mr. Ahmad Shahid, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights on Iran, gave grave concern on the continuing high rate of execution in Iran and jailing of journalists, human rights activists, and lack of freedom of expression and discrimination against women. However, Canada has long shown leadership in shaming the regime about its contempt for human rights, working in concert with a cross-regional group of countries. Since 2003, Canada has led efforts to pass an annual resolution at the United Nations General Assembly condemning Islamic Republic of Iran's human rights record, including its use of torture, restrictions on freedom of expression, etc. In fact, Canada is the first country to have initiated action at the parliamentary level to condemn the 1988 massacre in Iran as crime against humanity. In the summer of 1988, 30,000 men and women, mostly activists of opposition People's Mujahideen organization, were executed. The motion adopted unanimously by House of Commons on June 5, 2013, condemning the mass murder of political prisoners in Iran. Under conservative government of Prime Minister Harper, Canada severed diplomatic ties in 2012 completely, shuttering Canada's embassy in Iran and expelling Iranian diplomats from Canada. Canada simultaneously listed Islamic Republic of Iran as a state-sponsored terrorism, something that the current Liberal government has kept up. However, while the current government of Canada appears to have no plans to remove Iran from the list of state sponsors of terrorism, it has amended its autonomous sanctions against the regime in last February to allow for economic re-engagement as part of its campaign promise to restore diplomatic relations with Islamic Republic of Iran. The current government policy is based on the view that engagement with all countries is the right approach, and as far as Iran is concerned, Canada's re-engagement will benefit human rights in that country. It is through a strategy of engagement, not isolation, the government argues, that Canada is expected to maintain pressure on Iran. That being said, complicating the re-engagement process is Iran's recent incarceration of at least 2 Canada-linked prisoners. Saeed Malikpour is still in prison in Iran, and recently Dr. Homa Houdfar, professor at Concordia University, who was recently released. Current sanctions linked to Iran's nuclear and ballistic missiles programs. However, Canada should expand these sanctions to target those guilty of human rights offenses. When considering engaging Iran, the government must ensure that the best interest of Canadians is secured and that Canadian values are not compromised. We should not forget that the Iranian Canadians are still being imprisoned and abused in Iran. It wasn't too long ago that another Iranian blogger, Hamid Qasemi Shah, was released. Our government must demonstrate to Iran, its repressive leaders, that although dialogue might be underway, business as usual will not. In June 2009, after an almost certainly fraudulent election that saw the hardliner Iranian President Ahmadinejad to power, Maziar Bahari, a Canadian citizen born in Iran who was in the country reporting for Newsweek, was picked up by civilian Basij militia. Probably you saw that movie, which was made for him. Like Bahari, Zahra Kazemi was an Iranian-Canadian journalist arrested while taking photographs outside Evin prison in 2003, a charge that would be soon leveled at Bahari as well. Kazemi died 19 days after the arrest. The Iranian doctor who examined her unconscious body and later fled to Canada testified that she had been brutally raped. Her fingers were broken and missing nails. She had been flogged, and the toe and her nose were broken. Her skull was fractured. The simple truth is that this horrible deed was committed by Iran judiciary when Canada had perfectly good relations with that country. Clearly, Canada's relation with Islamic Republic of Iran did not help with respect to Iranian Canadians. Bahari was luckier. He was released after 118 days in prison. And more recently, as I indicated, Homa Hudfar, Concordia University, who was an anthropologist, was released after several days in Iran's prison. Re-engagement may be a chance for Canada to secure the release of Malekpour and serve many business-related purposes, but it will not guarantee the safety of Iranian Canadians who will travel to Iran in the future. The important question is, are we going to have any impact whatsoever on human rights situation in Iran and on Islamic Republic's regional policies? The fact that they arrested Hamad Hudfar in the middle of their current dialogue with the government of Canada shows how much they already don't take the Canadian government seriously. Furthermore, while talking about re-engagement with the government of Islamic Republic of Iran, Canada should also pursue re-engaging with the Iranian people by letting the Iranian people know that they're not alone and that Canada and Canadians stand in solidarity with them, that we have not forgotten the political prisoners, and we will continue to advocate on their behalf. Thank you very much.
The last speaker in the panel will be the Honorary Chris Alexander, the former Minister of Citizenship and Immigration from 2013 to 2015. He was the resident ambassador of Canada to Afghanistan and the deputy special representative to United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, where he actually was responsible for a large human rights unit. He also served as a vice consul and minister consular at the Embassy of Canada to Russia. He was in Russia actually during the First Chechen War and the Second Chechen War, and he knew Vladimir Putin when he was just carrying the suitcase for Sobchak.
I'm very proud to be the citizen of a country where these discussions can take place and where audiences like this come out on a dark Thursday night to talk about human rights around the world. Thank you for that. And give yourselves a round of applause, please. Also like to thank the Estonian Central Council. You, Marcus, are an honorary member as of tonight, flying back from Ukraine. But I had the opportunity to be with some members of the Estonian Canadian community and of the council at the Est-Docs Festival, which is the biggest documentary festival of film and video connected to Estonia by Estonians, by Estonian diaspora members, anywhere in the world outside of Estonia. And it was fantastic to be able to see how important our country can be as a forum for honest discussion, as a place where cultures come together, truly, not just in a formal way as we do at the United Nations or an international conference, but in a human way and in a fully connected way, the way we do as citizens of this great city together and the larger Toronto area in which I now live and this great country. And for me, it's very moving to be with all of you here today because I went to high school across the street, went to that Bloor cinema growing up, and used to come to parties in this building. Probably when I was too young to be going to parties, but I think it was the Estonian influence. And TARTU, as many of you know, is a very historic city in Estonia, the home of the first most historic university in Estonia, and so a fitting forum and symbol for what we're discussing here today, particularly as it relates to Russia. You know, the challenges we face in dealing with China, Iran, Pakistan are vast and and complex. But there are some simple truths. And I know with some of you in other fora, we've discussed these issues. In my understanding of history, our history as a country, our coming of age in 1867, but also our history before that, of having the rule of law established really quite early, of having elected assemblies in Upper Canada, Lower Canada, what are now Ontario and Quebec, not in 1867, in 1792. So we are not newcomers to democracy, and we know how hard it is to have the rule of law, justice, and opportunity for all protected over all that time. But unlike the countries we've talked about so far, in Russia as well, since 1791, we've only been invaded once. And it was in 1812, and it ended in 1814 with our victory, I like to think, but still a legitimate debate among historians. Let's just say the Americans didn't achieve their objectives, which were literally to incorporate Canada if they could. And that is 200 years ago. There is no other democracy of this size that has had unbroken democracy, rule of law, for 200 years, without a civil war, without a revolution, without an invasion or a major bombardment, and here I'm talking about the United Kingdom, because they had to endure that. And so there is a special atmosphere here that gives us a perspective on these issues that is sometimes more powerful than what you will get elsewhere, even in Washington and London. And so that's the spirit in which I approach tonight's discussion and this whole issue of our responsibility to the human rights agenda. And let me just say, we're not here just because it's early December and we're looking for something to do. December 10th is International World Human Rights Day. And there will be many events. You will be involved in many of them. We decided to have one of the first events in this cycle as we celebrate the objectives we all set for ourselves as humanity in the wake of the Second World War. And let's keep in mind, in the spirit of this small Canadian history lesson and the pride we take in Toronto, where so many people are born so far away and live so successfully together, the first draft of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was by a Canadian. As I think you all know, but let us remind ourselves of that. John Humphreys, very distinguished lawyer and member of our Foreign Service, who lived up to 1989, fittingly, both from the perspective of Europe and of China. And so Russia has been at the center of this debate over human rights from the beginning. Russia, as the Soviet Union, endorsed the Universal Declaration, has a human rights agenda to some extent, has in the new foreign policy, just enunciated by Vladimir Putin yesterday, I think, today or yesterday, recommitted itself to pursuing its version of a human rights agenda in the world. And yet, what we are seeing in Russia over the last 17 years, certainly under Putin, and over the longer term as well, is anything but progress on these issues. I lived in Russia, as Stacy mentioned, in the mid-90s, when there was chaos. And unfortunately, in the Russian mind, the first free voting, relatively democratic exercises in Russian, certainly modern Russian history, in over a century, or almost a century, were accompanied by great economic hardship, great poverty, organized crime, corruption, the sale of the century, as Minister Chrystia Freeland called it in the title of her book, the privatization that had the seal of approval of the World Bank, but wasn't seen by anyone in Russia as very fair. And so, perversely for Russians, democracy, progress on human rights, the rule of law, were identified with a loss of prestige and a plummeting standard of living. And so there was a certain amount of despair, as everyone realized that, not a certain amount of despair, a lot of despair, as people realized that Yeltsin was an alcoholic, the state wasn't working very well, there wasn't going to be a handoff to a democratic party after Yeltsin moved on. They were looking for someone who would take care of business for the Yeltsin family. And you will recall in 1998, 99, 2000, Russia went through 4 prime ministers. Yeltsin and the people around him looking for someone who might take over. And one was too young, one was too not obedient to the interests that were doing this interview process, this recruitment process. Another one was awkward as a politician. And then there was Putin, a relatively gray man, totally unknown. Denise and Stacy won't remember this too well. They were too young. But he came forward and he was seen as reliable. He was seen as loyal to a certain understanding of order in Russia because of his KGB background. And he was definitely prepared to do whatever was necessary for the family and for the powers that were already in place, for the Kremlin, to earn their trust. But he had to win an election. And I remember very well, I was in Ottawa at this time, there were real polls in Russia at that time, and he was at 4% or something, even though he had this big job. And there was a communist leader and other leaders very much ahead of him. So, problem for the campaign manager. Probably some of us in this conservative race face the same challenge. Single-digit approval. And so what happened? Apartment buildings started to be blown up in Moscow. The explosions were quickly blamed on Chechens. A new war was begun in Chechnya, and Putin rode that horse to victory. And there's still a debate about what actually happened to the apartment buildings. The consensus among people who have looked at this the most is that the people who wanted Putin to be president blew up the apartment buildings, not Chechens. And then we went on to, very quickly, takeover of media, which in the 90s had been at least diverse, at least clashing, in many cases investigative and factual. That started to end. Then we had the imprisonment of Khodorkovsky, perhaps the most Western-oriented, outwardly oriented of Russia's new business leaders, thrown into jail. A very strong message to other business people that they must toe the Kremlin line. Then we had an invasion of Georgia in 2005. Not many consequences from that. Yanukovych brought to power in Ukraine by hook and by crook in 2010. An opportunity in Syria only a few years ago with a red line that a US president did not see fit to stand behind or stand up for, and a loss of initiative by the US, an opportunity for Russia to take the initiative in Syria, and they've never looked back. An invasion of Ukraine in 2014, the killing in cold blood on a bridge outside the Kremlin, opposite Red Square in 2015, Boris Nemtsov, friend to many of us. And today, we really see the silencing of civil society in Russia. You cannot be an organization that has an international connection or international funding and do business in Russia unless all of your documents say on them, foreign agent. Can you imagine that? And LinkedIn has been shut down in Russia as of a few weeks ago. A sign perhaps of things to come, and certainly a sign of the level of intrusiveness that we see with regard to the internet from Russia, not to mention cyber attacks against Estonia and many other countries, NATO and non-NATO. And so where are we? I mean, I cannot help seeing Russia's story, all of these stories, in some respect, as part of our struggle to find, as humanity, a way of living together in peace, in prosperity on the planet. We are still in transition from empires, which were based on fear and violence, all too often, arbitrary rule, coercion, to states where citizens have control. And let's be clear, we have made progress. There are more states. There is a European Union. There are more democracies in Africa, certainly in Latin America. In Asia, definitely. On every continent, there are leading voices for democracy. And yet, in the last 10 years at least, there have been steps backwards. And they have often involved those states which, for one reason or another, think they have lost their prestige. In the case of Russia, did lose an empire, and in the case of Vladimir Putin, do not accept the new rules of the game, do not accept the borders, do not accept that the internet is actually a tool for market-based interaction, for free speech and free expression, and instead choose to see it as a CIA plot. This is the kind of reactionary view with which we are dealing, and against which we must be strong and sometimes fight. And I mean fight for freedom of speech. I mean fight for the freedom of political prisoners. And yes, I mean support the fight. And in the case of those of our friends who are in it, be with them in the fight to make Ukraine again whole and indivisible within its internationally recognized borders, which have been violated by a man and a coterie who have the gall to call into question the achievements of humanity over these last 70 years and to take us back to the chaos and misery of the era of Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, and the other thugs and bullies of the mid-20th century. We must not let this go any further than it has. And this approach has its equivalent in the ISI. It obviously has its approach in China in too many cases. It has its approach in the Basij and the Pastaran, Sepai Pastaran. These threats affect us here. They affect the prospects of the world. And when we don't have leadership, as we have not had it and may not have it for some time to come, from south of the border, from the country that has been known most often to lead on these issues from the Second World War, we have no other place to look but to ourselves, to our strength, in our clarity of vision, in our diversity, but in our unity, in the knowledge that human beings cannot be as successful we know we can all be without the freedom and the opportunity to speak their minds, to stand up for dignity, and to work together to make the world a better place, as we are doing tonight. Thank you very much for being here.
And I would also like to introduce our moderator, Marcus. Marcus is a very well-known in Canada publisher and journalist and director of documentaries. He's heavily involved in advocating for human rights in Russia. This is how we met each other. Marcus is quite often he writes for Canadian newspapers on the topics of foreign policy, and he has also done an extensive research into the how how can I say, cyber communication for the Iranian opposition?
I was in Kiev just this past weekend at a meeting of an organization called the Platform on Memory and Conscience in Europe. It's an EU-mandated organization that looks at the legacy of totalitarian regimes in Europe, both Nazi and communist. And we were lamenting the fact that there is a concerted effort right now by the Kremlin to actually reject much of the actual history that we accept today. So for example, the occupation of the Baltic states is being rejected and is being denied. According to the Kremlin, the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, voluntarily stepped into the Soviet Union. The Kremlin is right now pushing a new history where Stalin is being glorified in Russia. So human rights has really taken several steps backward, and we can see this in the way that they're treating the Tatar minority in Crimea, and how they're actually some of the gross human rights abuses that are happening in Syria. Now there are some very tight Canadian connections to all of this, and I think we heard some of them today. One of them was state-sponsored threats inside Canada. I think Zheng Zhui can tell you all about this, but this seems to be happening, and I think we need to start talking about how we combat this. This is certainly also happening within the Russian community and from the Russian embassy. The other theme that I want to talk about is Canadians that are being kidnapped in the case of China, and certainly in Iran. We need to be doing more to help free these Canadians who are being imprisoned outside of our country and in these terrible regimes. So my question to all of you is to start off the discussion: what specifically can Canada do to help protect human rights activists and pro-democracy activists in these states, and how can we deter their rights being abused?
What Chris Alexander said and what my other two colleagues said, that now actually we have to work together, like-minded people. Absolutely, Canada is a great country. And at least we can talk, we can raise our voice. But I tell you honestly, what I see in our own communities, I mean, there are elements who are part of government who could go to any extent, but because of our system over here in Canada, we are safe. So I don't trust the government much. Our law enforcement agencies are great, but they are too naive as well. But the only hope that we live in a great society for sure, and we should, like-minded people, should work together. As Chris said, that unfortunately we have to see this kind of leadership for a while. So in that scenario, we should not leave our struggle. We should rather enhance our struggle. We should speak up. We should speak out on those issues. As I mentioned that Baloch fellows here in Canada are denying their refugee status. We are importing refugees whom we don't know. And the refugees we have here in Canada, they really are in trouble if they go back, and they are really in trouble here in Canada. They are being threatened and harassed over here. So we have to work with those elements, and we have to enhance our circles so that we could speak. And also, unfortunately, our media, very important. Our mainstream media does not recognize these issues as issues at all. They don't want to speak about honor killing. They even do not pronunciate Baloch. So we need alternate media. We need alternate media to raise our voice, and we have to work together. And I assure all of you, Canadians are great people. We all are Canadians. If we give them the message that we are suffering from state actors not abroad but here in Canada, they'll help us.
Yes. First, be strong, and second, be open, 3 and be supportive. I tell you one more story. Dr. Wang Bingzhang came to Canada in 1979 and studied at McGill University. And he obtained his doctorate degree in 2 years. And he went back to China, was welcomed as, of course, a very great guest. And then he realized that Canada has a much better political system. So he wanted China, to learn about this. He started the Overseas Chinese Democracy, and he was kidnapped in Vietnam 2002, and of course take back to China and sentenced to life, still in prison. His family members, his father, mother, sister, brother, and wife, children are Canadian. And our Canadian government have talking with the Chinese government for the past 14 years, but he is still in prison. And another case is a businesswoman who is a Canadian, of course, immigrant from China, and she's rich. He went back to China the year 2014, and she was caught and put into black jail until today. And his son is also a Canadian citizen, but so scared, didn't want to talk about the case. And then waited and waited until in September, he decided to talk to media. And, Globe and Mail had this story probably November 16 or 17, if you can check that. And the Chinese government reacted to this. And they said that, the case, because of the Chinese local government just wanted to take her money. So the case has been returned. So it's very helpful when you do something. And the Canadian Foreign Affairs wrote a letter to Chinese government too. And of course, there are a lot of cases in between, and we don't know how to do it. For example, when the Chinese embassy and the consulate, they are being very wild in our Canadian soil. When Uyghur people, they were having demonstration in front of the Chinese consulate in Toronto. We went there to support, but there was only about 10-some people. So I asked, why, we should have more people for this event. And I was told, the Chinese consulate learned about the event, the demonstration. They even make phone calls to those attendees and to warn them, if you come out and we will have your photo, sent back to China, to your home area, to the Public Security Bureau, and your home in China will be in trouble. So this is very much they are doing, but we need to talk about this openly and to make people aware of this.
There are different layers, I suppose, involved in this equation. Number one, as far as I'm concerned, the government of Canada has done a very good job, at least starting with Prime Minister Harper, in maybe the only country which called a spade as far as the Iranian regime is concerned. And that has been much appreciated, except that there are some technical issues in the absence of consular services. Then there has been a great deal of complaint and discontent among Iranians who have to go to Washington, D.C. To get their documents stamped or get the Iranian passport renewed in order to go back to Iran. And actually, this is not something that the government of Canada was not aware of. In fact, they were quite proactive when they closed the embassy in Ottawa, which a lot of reasons were cited. and I had the pleasure of meeting the Prime Minister Harper myself in House of Commons once. Then I was the president of Iranian Canadian Congress here in Toronto. We discussed that, and then there were a lot of details shared. But Government of Canada offered to Iran to open interest section through a third party, the same way that Iran's interests are served through the Embassy of Pakistan in Washington, D.C. for 35 years, and about 2 million Iranians have been taken advantage of it with no complaints whatsoever. So this is what we would have loved to have, but Iran didn't play ball. And then finally they came up with a counter idea. They said they would like to have the interest represented through Embassy of Oman in Canada. There is no Embassy of Oman in Canada, by the way. And so they wanted to bring pressure to bear. So now there is some petition has been going on by one of the members of the parliament, an Iranian member from Richmond Hill, who's gathered about several thousand signatures asking the government for reopening the embassy, where actually the problem is not the diplomatic relationship, the problem is lack of the consular services, which would have been taken care of had Iran cooperated in this regard. As far as business is concerned, actually, I'm sorry if I'm digressing because there are so many different facets to this question of yours. As far as business is concerned, Americans are apparently selling passenger jets. Boeing is selling to Iran, and they don't have diplomatic relationships, so our Bombardier can do the same without any diplomatic relationship whatsoever. That's not a prerequisite for that at all. So it's understandable that business matters because European Union is pretty much active back in Iran. Germans have obviously their Italians are they do business regardless of maybe human rights issues and so on and so forth. Now with sanctions gone, so maybe Canada feels left out, and maybe there are business opportunities that we could take advantage of. Absolutely. But the human rights is paramount. And as long as Iranian Canadians who travel to Iran and then get arrested and their safety is not guaranteed, some of them get murdered, then the opening up an embassy and the opening dialogue, open dialogue may not be a bad thing, but that should be there must be a precondition as to any future relationship has to be based upon mutual trust and recognition of the rights of Iranians. The problem with Iranians going to Iranian Canadians going to Iran is that as soon as they arrive there, they're treated as an Iranian citizen. Iran does not recognize dual citizenship. So if they get arrested, there's like when Zahra Kazemi was murdered in Iran, the ambassador of Canada couldn't even get permission to enter the courtroom to see how the trial was shaping up. So what I'm trying to say is that when we had full-fledged relationship with Iran, Iran had total disregard for human rights and the rights of citizens who were maybe even slightly outspoken. So restoring relationship, I'm not sure is going to do much. Basically, the pressure has to be applied to Iran without a doubt. Any kind of future relationship has to be conditional upon good deeds and good behavior on their part. But there are so many different factions within Iran. As we know, Iran is now under the control of, almost under control of Islamic Republic Guards. And they're not only in control of the economy, it's also in control of judiciary and so forth. So it doesn't look very promising. Yeah.
Two quick points on that. One, we must defend the integrity of our education system, of our justice institutions in Canada at all costs. And we shouldn't be nervous about this. At every stage of Canadian history, when you look back to the very origins of our educational system, there have been groups in Canada or groups who came to Canada who wanted things done differently. And this is our story of coming up with a strong system. Yes, we take the best and we improve the system when we can, but we never, those of us who know it and appreciate it, allow it to be adulterated or watered down or weakened because someone arrives with a different view. It has to serve all of us, and that is the same for the justice system. Secondly, when it comes to diplomats and consular staff, there are very clear rules, and those rules are enforced in the serious capitals of the world, if they are not being enforced in Canada, with regard to the missions of any country, that should become a public issue and a political issue. Because a diplomat who breaks the law by threatening someone, by corrupting someone, by intimidating someone, is committing a crime and is therefore done something that is not consistent with their status under the Vienna Convention, and they must leave. Now, I think there is a challenge in all of our countries in that some of the people who would normally be following these things, for the Russian embassy or the Chinese embassy or other embassies, have for the last 10 years at least been focused on another priority, namely terrorism. And you've heard it, you've read it from the British experience, the French experience. We have focused on non-state threats, sometimes to the exclusion of state threats. And you all know I am a proponent of looking very clearly at the states. I do not think we have these non-state actors on the scale we have them without the very clear complicity of states. Here each state has a different fingerprint, a different way of operating, but we have to hold states to account under the rules that do exist. And I think those are rules that we really can enforce. But we need to give it the necessary resources and attention.
And Dr. Jandi, my question is, there is a Korean pastor is in prison in North Korea, and his charges were quite interesting, like attempted overthrowing the government. What do you think the Canadian government should do, instead of Trudeau just talking the empty words to release the pastor?
Many of us know this pastor. I had the pleasure of meeting him. He traveled to North Korea regularly up until the time he was arrested, detained, and we should make a very big issue about this. There should not be any bigger issue in our relations with North Korea, and it should also be a very big issue in the relations with countries that have influence in North Korea. I agree with you. It should come out into the open. It should, when private diplomacy fails, involve naming and, when appropriate, shaming. This is a disgraceful abuse of a very, very dedicated man's trust. That he was being accepted as someone who was doing good for a country that desperately needs friends and desperately needs help. But there's a larger issue here again. We had 2 Canadian citizens taken hostage in the Philippines and killed by a terrorist group named after an Afghan warlord that I happen to know. I mean, this is an international, trained by you-know-who, the ISI. There are a number of challenges underway that we are not meeting. A number of people taken by the same group in the Philippines were released. Did they pay ransoms? Perhaps. I don't particularly believe in that. But I think we all as Canadians believe in doing absolutely everything to protect our citizens from this kind of harm. And in recent years, whether it's Iran or the Philippines or other terrorist groups or Pakistan, Afghanistan, and certainly China, we have not had the success that we really should have. And I'm glad you raised this case involving North Korea. We should send a very clear message from Canada that if you are in trouble, if you are a hostage, if you are, above all, if you are a political prisoner for any reason and a citizen of our country, we will be coming for you, using every diplomatic means available, certainly every legal means available, and other means when necessary. And those other means should have been on the table in the case of the Philippines.
First of all, my name is Mikey. I'm an Estonian Canadian. And my career has been for decades teaching immigrant students in high school, teaching them English. And the English part has been fine. Now, they have taught me their own languages. So I will say, for being here, for all the work you do, merci and setse and aita. Now, for Pakistan, when I read your bio and saw all the languages that you spoke, I thought, no, I'm not even going to go there. That's too hard. But my question is, well, I have a threefold concern. But it's all about education. Education in the countries that you come from, which I don't know that I would have a lot of power to change. Education for Canadian students, because right now, as you probably know, all they get is one grade 10 history course on Canada. And if they decide to, which are usually the best students, they go for a grade 12 world issues class. Otherwise, there is nothing about human rights. So that to me is a concern, and that's something that I think can be changed. Now, education falls under the province, but perhaps that could be changed in Ontario. And my third concern is something that perhaps I find that people don't usually address, and that is, for my students, they have come from the education systems of your country. And in those countries, the education system is not honest. And you know that. They are learning what the government wants them to learn. And when they come here, and I have mainly boys because their families are taking them away from military service. So I have mainly boys. And these boys insist for all the years that they are here that what they learned was correct, what they learned was accurate. And it's not. And I've had, the first example that I got of that was when I had Iranian boys sit down with me and they said, Miss, I want to be a terrorist. I want to join a terrorist group here in Canada. I want to know what is being done and what can be done about those immigrant students who remain so loyal to their governments back home. And we have so many of them now.
Thank you for raising this very vital issue. You use the phrase honest education system. I don't find many issues in countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan, and many others like, people who are illiterate or who don't have resources to go to schools. I haven't seen them creating problems over there, I tell you the truth. I have seen powerful, so-called educated people creating problems over there because of intellectual dishonesty there. Pakistan's textbooks have been analyzed, and it has been clearly observed that textbooks call names for non-Muslims. Pakistan's notorious intelligence agencies, army, and the corrupt media and the bureaucracy is not run by uneducated people, run by educated people. Uneducated, poor people do not have access to Islamabad. Yes, yes. Over 130 people have joined from Canada, ISIS there. They were not illiterate people. They were in Canadian schools. As I said in my earlier talk, that the issue is not just their issues now here, because we have over 1 million people, and all are good people, but 1% of those 1 million people, they have certain mindset. So it's not about lack of education, it's about a certain mindset which does not change despite having PhD degrees. I have encountered thousands of people from my community here in Canada who are well educated apparently, but they have hatred towards others. They hold PhD degrees here in Canada, but they have so strong hatred towards others. So how to change that mindset? Through alternate media. That's what I say again and again.
Just a couple of words. Actually, there are about 6 million of Iranians who fled Iran after the revolution. And this country receives about 7,000 of them immigrants every year, probably the most educated and skilled ones. And I'm kind of proud to say that I only know of one example of terrorism, Islamic terrorism, instigated by Iranian. Actually turned out to be not in Islamic. It was that German young guy who killed a few because he was disenchanted with the society rather than had anything to do with it. So, so I'm surprised that your student wanted to become, if I understood correctly, wanted to become a terrorist. Despite all the brainwashing, you would be surprised to know that this regime has done more a better job than anything else in the past 400 years to destroy the image of Islam in Iran. It is their utmost pressure and repression which has backfired to the extent that the generation which is born under this regime 37 years ago is the most potent opponent of them. And the tendency for them to speak out, if they get a chance, they will. In about 7 years ago, when there was a fraudulent election in Iran, and so people took to the street, and then there were millions chanting to Mr. Obama, either you're with us or with them. And Mr. Obama was negotiating with the Iranians in Geneva at that point. So they went back inside because they simply couldn't risk it, basically. So,
yeah. No, it's true. The Iranian youth today are the most freedom-loving young people in the world in many respects. And yes, we do only take Iranian intellectuals as immigrants to Canada. But that's because of the point system. And this is the point I wanted to make. We could try to find out before immigrants come, before visitors come, what they actually think. We used to have this kind of discretion for immigration officers. We used to evaluate immigrants on the basis of moral character. And you could simply exclude someone on the basis of, we think they have a bad moral character, because you heard something bad about them. Then we changed it in the middle of the 20th century to something called personal suitability. And that is what was litigated in the courts and ultimately very subjective, leading to fewer interviews for immigrants. Not because we weren't screening them, but because we were looking for objective ways of assessing immigrants. Because if you ask someone who's been educated in Russia, for example, what they really think about the Holocaust or what they really think about Stalin, for the interview, they are not going to give you their real answer. They are not going to speak from their heart. They are going to speak to the purposes of the interview and mislead if necessary, come across as best as possible. It's human nature. And we would have no way of getting beyond that. So that's why our immigration system tries to rely on objective criteria. How much education does the person have? In what kind of institution, recognized or not? Language ability. It is an indication of a commitment to be part of a new society. French, English, even other languages can be taken into account. But obviously our official ones are the only ones you get points for. And then thirdly, work experience. And because there are so many more educated people in the world today with higher levels of education and language ability, that tends to work for us, especially now that we're ranking and sorting people on the basis of express entry. But we mustn't stop there. People do need a path to come, once they've been selected to come to Canada, to become Canadians. And that doesn't mean just getting the passport, as we all know. It means being welcomed. It means having a sense of belonging after a certain amount of time. It means having a sense of purpose and opportunity, which usually involves the job market, but it also involves your family and your community. And then it involves wanting to participate as a citizen, to uphold the law, do your duty, you know, all the things that we know Canadians do, and volunteer. We are I think, the top country in the world for giving hours to volunteer purposes, and that is native-born Canadians and volunteers. So the system works, but we're in a very challenged world where identities are fractured, the internet, networks we all belong to, hundreds of chat groups and different wings of our own families, and you know, we can communicate with someone in Kashmir in a second. We need to reinforce what the Canadian dimension is, and I think that does involve, I'm a historian, it should involve more in the curriculum about where this country came from, how we got to be what we are, and what we're doing in the world, and more in our media. This is what CBC should be for, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm the conservative candidate, one of. I strongly believe the CBC has a mandate. It was created by a conservative government in 1935. It should have a mandate to tell us now, in this digital age, what it means to be Canadian, tell stories about Canada, about immigration, about our diversity, but above all, about what brings us together. And same for our other Canadian networks and the alternative media. I mean, you're already doing it. But this is a challenge, and it doesn't just involve formal education and formal immigration. It involves really everything we do.
My name is Sima, and I'm originally from Iran. Thank you so much. It's been a great event. Yesterday was my younger son's birthday. He would have turned 22 if he was alive, but he passed away 2 years before that. And I didn't get the chance to see him for more than 15 years. And it was because of the Sharia law that rules Iran. And you know how it is. Women don't have any right to the divorce, to custody. And basically it caused me and my kids being away for years and years until my younger son passed away. But the challenge is, I came here as a refugee, and I used to work with some social justice activists, but when it came to criticizing Islamic laws, I faced a wall. They were not willing to hear me. I used to write for Toronto Star, but one of my challenges here is why, when it comes to voicing my opinion, criticizing Islamic laws, some of the people tell me, especially to my surprise, feminists, that I don't know what I'm talking about. I do know what I'm talking about. I live that. And one of the people that criticize me the most are the feminists and the liberals, and it just blows my mind. So considering the fact that we're living in one of the most diverse cities in the world, why the Islamists have the opportunity to use this freedom on their advantage, but when it comes to people like me, that there are many of people like me in here and Iran that they don't have a voice. Why we face such a wall that no one is willing to hear us when it comes to Islamic law, Sharia law. I really don't care what people practice. It's everyone's right to practice Islam, Buddhism, nothing whatsoever. But challenging Islamists is something that we are facing here, and so many people ignore that. It's been wonderful meeting you, Mr. Tyre, so either you or any of the panelists, I really appreciate if I get some answers.
Thank you very much for you telling me this. If you don't tell, I don't know. So talk about that, write about that, post about that, to have people who have the similar situation and experience. And Canada is it's a good place to talk about your own experience. Thank you.
What I know that under the leadership of Premier Dalton McGuinty, we were this close to have the Sharia law introduced in Ontario, but thanks to activity of a lot of people, including a few Iranian women, that was prevented, and hopefully will never happen again.
Yeah, I just want to let you know that I am a Muslim, so I understand what you have just said totally, and I don't dare to criticize the religion of myself. So anyway, that's other topic, not for today. And I like the idea about the education of these things. And I have my personal experience that when my son was growing up, when he came from school, I asked him what you learn about they learned about communism, and I asked him what you learn about it. And he said, communism is evil. Well, that's true to me, but however, do you know about evil? Evil things may be beautiful. Even the stepmother of Snow White, she could be the most beautiful woman in the world if there's no Snow Whites. And when we talk, in the schools, when we talk about the evil things, people use all the bad words about them. They are bad, totally. However, the students, the kids, don't know the beauty of the evil things. And when they don't know that, when they grow up, when they see the beauty, like in China, they will say, whoa, my teachers were lying. China are so prospective, and it is so good, which is totally true. Totally not true. The evil things, they are evil because they built a beautiful country with the evil mind, with their evil power. They steal the money from 1 billion people to build a beautiful society to show the world. And that's what's happening. And that is we should tell about. However, it's not only China. I know this is, again, back to the political correctness about many, many things, about even the Islamic State. We talk about that evil thing as well. There must be a lot of beauty in it. That's how the young people, or many young people, are attracted to it. And the public media don't dare to tell about it. That's a really main concern that we have.
Okay.
I'm happy to be in Canada. And my question is, how do we stop countries such as Pakistan influencing the Canadian government on human rights organizations being terrorists? This has now affected my status in Canada. As I was told, the organization I am involved are terrorists when we are simply educating for human rights abuses in Balochistan. What is the meaning of terrorism towards the Canadian government? Once again, how do we stop the influence from intelligence agencies such as the ISI affect a human rights activist in Canada? And I want to clear something. I'm not a terrorist. I am a freedom fighter. And I believe the peaceful means of a struggle. Thank you.
My question to Honorable Chris is, you have been Canada's ambassador to Afghanistan during the most troubling time in that region. I'm sure you have experienced Pakistan's terrorist sponsoring role to sabotage peace and supporting Taliban and other Islamic terrorist extremists. Pakistan is doing same in Balochistan today. It is backing and training ISIS there and exporting terror to the world. We have recent example of Ohio attack in front of us. What do you think Canada should do prevent such terrorism and stop Pakistan? And to those people who are living in Canada and government, they are working for other foreign countries. They are working for other agencies. What is your answer about this?
It is hard to send your people, send your NGOs to many of the countries that you mentioned. But even when that's not possible, it is possible to operate in different ways. We have seen it on Iran. We have seen it to some extent on Russia and Ukraine. We will see it in other cases. We need to be creative, innovative, and expeditionary on these issues. We have to be out there in the world, in the field. On the question of interference, in your case, I want to hear more about what has happened recently, because I don't think I have the latest information. But when it comes to the Taliban's role in Afghanistan, the situation is very clear. We just celebrated the 10th anniversary of Operation Medusa and the operations before it, when really Canadian forces were the only major military army presence in southern Afghanistan, and the Taliban were surging in a very unexpected way in the spring and then even more in the fall of 2006, hoping to take over again Kandahar, Helmand provinces. Canadians prevented that with the Afghan army, the Urdu Milli of Afghanistan, and then increasingly with other NATO forces who deployed in 2006. But I remember when this fighting was going on, being in Kabul during the official visit of President Musharraf, who was being wined and dined, hobnobbing with four-star US generals, lying to President Karzai through his teeth, and then was feted and celebrated in Washington, where he went on the Jon Stewart show and was asked jokingly by Jon Stewart, this American icon, "So where's bin Laden?" And he said, "Well, if I knew John, I'd be a very rich man," or something like that. And they all laughed. The truth of the matter is, he knew exactly where bin Laden was at that time. He was living in his compound outside of Abbottabad as of early 2006. His army, the vast structure of it, which he was the head as chief of the army staff still in 2006, was systematically training, arming, equipping the Taliban, who were coming to Afghanistan to kill Canadian soldiers. So, what would I do? The inter-services intelligence should be listed by any country that has been involved in Afghanistan and that cares about terrorism as a state sponsor of terrorism, as the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is, as a number of state-sponsored organizations are in Iran and other countries. This is a grave violation of every canon of international law, of the principle of non-interference, in this case in Afghanistan, and of all of the conventions we've adopted in recent years about terrorism. And on the evil being beautiful or attractive, I mean, keep in mind, in English poetry, and I'm sure in many other languages, take Milton's Paradise Lost, the devil is always the most charming, the best dressed, the most articulate and well-spoken. And that's always been a challenge for those of us who care about human rights.
I just want to say the same thing. When we look at the Beijing Olympic Games, it probably was the most powerful and beautiful Olympic Games. And because dictatorship, they can do this much, much better than a democratic country, because they doesn't need to have a budget. They don't care about the cost. They don't need to ask for people if they like it. And they just can, just do whatever they want. And even probably the North Korea can do this much better than Canada. And we need to tell this to young people, what is behind that. Thank you.
Responding to Karima's concern and question that how to disconnect Pakistan's ISI's influence in Canadian government. As a working journalist from Pakistani origin, I know very clearly that unfortunately and sadly, all Canadian parliaments of Pakistani origin work very closely with Pakistani diplomats and ISI. And we have to deliver very strong message to them. I have warned them, I have no fear. I have warned them several times. I have written in the press, in Huffington Post, in Clarion Project, that you guys are being instructed by ISI, and we need to educate our Minister Citizenship and Immigration, Mr. John McKell. He does not understand, unfortunately, those delicate issues. But as I said, as Chris says, as all of us saying that these are the issues that we should not depend and rely on this one event. We should keep raising our voice against all those issues because Canada is our home now, and we have to make Canada safe for all of us, and we are proud Canadians.
Great. I'm going to use my moderator's prerogative, and I'm going to ask the last question, if you don't mind. For the past 4 years, I've been working on what's known as Magnitsky legislation here in Canada. That's sanctions legislation that allows the government to target specifically Russian human rights abusers and now hopefully globally human rights abusers around the world. I'd like to know from all of you, from your perspectives, will this be effective in helping the human rights situation in your respective countries?
We should ask our government over and over that we should impose sanctions to those states who do not fulfill human rights obligations. That's a simple answer.
Human rights abuses is beyond the border, and human rights protection should be without border. So I'm very happy if this bill can be passed, and even though may cannot be do not much to the Chinese dictatorship, but still a warning to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, a collective action obviously would have been far more effective on part of several countries, and as they've been in the past, as I mentioned, Canada probably was a leader in bringing resolutions. However, Canada can continue doing what it has, targeting not only the corrupt people, not people, for instance, we have in our community people who are in position of high position in the private sector, and then they all of a sudden we find them here as immigrant, wondering how they could hold a post back home, and then where it's, but also high authorities in religious organizations, as well as the government and sort of shadow government entities, and there are many of them, and we should stop allowing them into the country. And I have talked to the former, your successor, Mr. Kenny, multiple times about this. And he mentioned that the government is fully aware of high officials on the Iranian government through ISIS, and so forth. But it was the middle people that he needed the help of the community to identify. And so yeah, Canada should continue targeting them, and it works. People can be saved. Those people on the death row can be saved by applying pressure, targeted pressure. So that's what the actually targeted sanction is. It would hurt people who hurting, not necessarily the mass who might be a victim of sanctions of a sort.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Canada should seek to have as many allies on this as possible. Other countries that emulate what we do, but we should have the best sanctions regime in the world. There's no reason why we could not go beyond what the Magnitsky sanctions have done in the United States, certainly go beyond what the Europeans have. And it's the ability, as everyone has said, to target individuals and entities. And I would pursue, and we have this ability, but it needs to be more precise. The Special Economic Measures Act, it needs to be amended. There's one group of people who deserve our sanction when it is a Canadian interest that is affected, like a Canadian citizen, like some of the cases you mentioned in Iran. There's another case when it's a major human rights violation that is of universal interest. That's Magnitsky, that could be many other cases that you've mentioned tonight, could be many Chinese cases. And then thirdly, there is this state sponsorship of violence on a large scale, terrorist or otherwise, that deserves special tension. That's what we've done in Russia's case. And I find it very hard to explain to a Baluch Canadian or a Pakistani Canadian why we have these quite robust sanctions against Russia for interfering violently through proxies in Ukraine, and yet we have done nothing to sanction Iran for this. We did for nuclear issues, but not for this, or Pakistan or other countries. State sponsorship of these irregular forces is a reality. It is perhaps the biggest threat to international peace and security. Look at Syria, look at South Asia, look at Lebanon. And that needs to be addressed by sanctions as well. But it's not enough to have the sanctions, you have to have the political will to use them, and you have to have the people on the ground, your diaspora citizens, your geographic experts, and your people in the field who can correctly identify who is who. If you sanction someone in any regime, Russian or Iranian, for committing some act, summary execution or something, and you get the wrong person, then everyone is laughing at you, and your credibility is gone. So it has to be robust, but it has to be precise. You have to, it's like, if you use it wrong, it's like civilian casualties. You have undercut the whole reason for the operation.
I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here this evening, and Stacey, thank you so much for organizing such a wonderful evening.
Viewers, we are here in Toronto. Today, an event was organized by Ms. Stacey regarding Canada's human right standing in today's global position. We have seen Mr. Chris Alexander, who was the special guest for that. Along with him, there were journalists of their own community and journalists who were there in mainstream Canadian writing for the news. They discussed and respond to the questions along with the very thoughtful discussions that what Canada should be standing while we are having human rights situation in the globe.
#1 multicultural channel. This is TAG TV.